Hello, everybody. Welcome again to that word chat. So great to see everybody in the room. Today, we have Keith Houston, who literally, we were talking before he asked, how did we get started with this? So I told the story about COVID and Mary Norris, and we wanted to do a show because she couldn't come to town for a book reading. And what I didn't say was that from the very beginning, when we decided to keep doing this, we would make a list of people we think would be cool to have on the show, and Keith Houston was on that list from the beginning. So shame on us for not having him on until now. This was his book at the time, Shady Characters. We will talk about that. But Keith is coming to us from Scotland, and his new book is Faced with Tears of Joy: A Natural History of Emoji. And it's coming out July 17th, which is Thursday this week, which Keith tells me is International Emoji Day or Emoji Celebration Day, or what is the
World Emoji Day.
World Emoji Day? All right. And it's but it's already out now. I got my copy July 1st. It came out in the US. So if you're in the rest of the world, Thursday is the big celebration day. Keith has also written Empire of the Sum, about the calculator, the book about books. We'll talk about all these things. He's also appeared in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, Mental Floss, BBC Culture, and Literary Hub. And you live in is it Linlithgow?
It is Linlithgow, yes.
Linlithgow. Oh, I got it right. Okay, I'm terrible with pronunciations, but I managed that. And I'm wearing, we had, just a couple of weeks ago, no, a few weeks ago, we had Lorna Gibb, who was from Western Scotland, as our guest on the show. So we've had the last three shows, 2 out of 3 have been Scottish guests, which is great. And so this time I'm wearing my Scottish tie that I got at Kinloch Anderson in Leith a few years ago. And it's actually the first time I've worn it. It's really quite warm. But anyway.
Just try wearing a kilt made of the same stuff. That's really warm.
Yeah. I was interested.
Just an appetizer, really, for the kilt.
Yes. Are you a kilt wearer? Do you have a formal
I am
outfit?
not all the time, obviously,
Yeah,
but
no.
I'm the occasion merit it.
Yeah. I think I'd be all for it. We were looking at the extremely, really expensive there. It's like buying. Well, it's like I suppose buying a tuxedo here. It's over $1,000 or £1,000 is the case.
Yeah.
Anyway, already getting off topic, but that's the fun thing to do. We always love to do that. So let me start with a little bit of a challenge. You are I believe, a computer software engineer. So how did you come to be writing about punctuation first? Calculators make sense, but and now emoji.
Um, it was a bit of I don't know. I think I was getting bored with the software, so I studied physics at university and wasn't an especially good physicist. But it turns out I was okay at computers, and so I kind of lucked into a job straight out of university. Did that for about a decade, and kind of enjoyed being gainfully employed, having a bit of money and not many responsibilities. But I'd always wanted to write something, and I kept a kind of personal blog for a while, which I guess was effectively just writing practice in some sense. And I was actively looking around for something to write about, and a couple of friends recommended 2 different books to me at the time. One was an essay on typography by an English sculptor called Eric Gill. He also designed typefaces, designed Gill Sans.
Oh.
So I read the book, and it was quite interesting. And one of the things in it was the use of this character. It looked like a P, only backwards, with the bowl filled in, which is, of course, on the cover of Shady Characters. It's called a pilcrow. It's a paragraph mark. And I didn't really know what this was. So I thought, that's interesting. I'll look this up. And I looked it up in the glossary at the back of the other book, which had been recommended to me, which was The Elements of Typographic Style by Robert Bringhurst, who is a more recent typographer. So Gill was active in the first part of the 20th century. Bringhurst, I'm not sure if he's still alive, but certainly a late 20th century writer. And as I did so, I realized in this glossary there were so many of these unusual characters that I recognized, but I had no idea what they meant or how they'd come about. And then separately, I'd started reading about Eric Gill himself, and it turned out that he was an appalling human being, which is a really good subject. If you, it's a really good thing to discover about someone if you want to write about them, which is a really horrible thing to say. But he was nothing if not interesting, let's say. And I just thought there's a story here. There is this mark that it still exists in Microsoft Word. You can use it to toggle the invisible characters on and off in Microsoft Word, for example. You still see it in some books or where something is being typeset by someone who is aware of sort of typographic history. So it's a bit of an affectation, but if it's used well, then it looks good. It looks interesting. And I thought there's a character here to be written about. It has a history, and then the more I looked at it, it's like, okay, this goes all the way back to the classical period, and many other marks kind of suggested themselves as well. So I started writing about them, and I thought each one of these can be a chapter in a book. I had no idea how to publish a book. I had no idea how to write a book, really. So I just wrote until I had what looked like some book chapters. I talked to a friend of mine, and he didn't really know what to do either. So he just said, "Why just stick it on the web?" So I did. So that's where shadycharacters.co.uk came from, which started about, oh, I think 16 years ago now. And an editor, or rather an agent, got in touch through the blog. I'd been emailing everyone that I talked to as I've been researching all of this. I emailed to say, thanks for the help. I've now put this into a blog. The word got around, an agent got in touch. That turned into a book, and then there was another book, and then there was a hiatus because we had kids, and then another book, and now the fourth book. So it's just kind of started from then. It was almost it was almost by accident initially, I guess. Although I've thought about what I write about, what I enjoy writing about, and the most pithy way I can put it is I like unusual forms of information technology, and I think emoji count. I think calculators count. I think the book is a kind of actually quite conventional information technology, and I think punctuation is also a relatively unusual form of information technology. So that's, I think, what I do, or at least that's what I tell myself I do.
Yeah. Well, no, okay. You created you've given us the theme. That certainly makes sense. And it's easy to see where you go from printer's marks to emoji, which is almost all electronic thing, although you can certainly see that in print as well. Was that a natural progression that you got into emoji as a subject?
It was to a degree. So I published Shady Characters, and then the book kind of naturally came out of that. I'd done so much reading and research about bookmaking just incidentally. You can't talk about punctuation without talking about printing. You can't talk about printing without talking about books. Um, and many of these punctuation marks had their origins centuries or millennia ago. So I kind of accidentally or just coincidentally learned a lot about book history. So that came quite naturally from the first book. And then I was looking around to think, what can I write about next? And I talked to my agent. I said, I think emoji would be great. I think they're really interesting. This must have been mid to late 2010s. And she said she didn't know who would buy this book, who wants to read about emoji.
Ah,
And so it didn't really go anywhere. I did then do a bunch of writing for the blog just for my own edification, and that formed the sort of the nucleus of the book as it is now. But yeah, she didn't really believe it, and then we came back to it later, and I don't know, she'd been able to see emoji become much more popular, much more widespread in those intervening few years, and it made more sense to her. And so the book that I'd wanted to write 5 years ago turned into the book that I actually got to write most recently.
uh, so let me back up just a little bit. When you did Shady Characters on your website, did you basically publish the book on the website, like you buy it, or was it just put up in chapters for people to read? Or
So the writing that I did initially turned into six kind of series of articles, and each one of those series was the basis of a chapter. But I think in the end, the book was about 60 or 70% new material, as compared to what was on the blog. So there's a lot of moving stuff around. There's a lot of updating and obviously a lot of expanding on it. So I talk about many different marks in the book. I've since covered incidentally on the blog, but I haven't really given the same attention to online.
Okay, so there's a question I wanted to ask to right off the bat, and Kate, if you have a question to ask in the room, you know the drill. Just put in query and put it in chat, and we'll get to you. But we do have a question already in the room.
We do. This is from Kate. Kate, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. I just wanted to clarify whether the plural of emoji is emojis or if it's like sheep, like one emoji, two emoji, three emoji, four.
That's a really good question. So in the book, I used emoji as both singular and plural because, as I understand it, that's how it's written or spelled in or pronounced in Japanese, which is where the word comes from. I've since, so I can't remember when I handed the manuscript to the book. I think it was it earlier this year? But I've since read a couple of different pieces that suggest that it's now pretty much a kind of naturalized English word, and emojis is fine, and arguably less ambiguous as well. So I think you can use whatever you like.
We are editors in this group, so we do you know we prefer answers. But you're absolutely right. I was actually interviewed on this topic about 6 or 7 years ago, a while ago. Is it singular or plural? And I said it could go either way. I said it's an Americanized word, it's not Americanized. I shouldn't say that, but it's become into the English language, and we add s to make a plural, and so it's perfectly fine to say emojis. But then, famously, I think the Associated Press initially said add an s to pluralize emoji, and then they reversed themselves and said no, just go with emoji, because people wrote in and said no, that's not how you do it. So it's a controversial topic.
I see you have the 16th, 17th, and 18th editions of the Chicago Manual behind you. I'm sure one of them will tell you. I think I stopped at 16, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I don't remember what Chicago says on emoji, but somebody in the room will. And I find myself saying emoji now, I think just because that's more common, even though I recommended years ago that it be emojis with an S.
You know, it's going to make me sound like a terrible person, but I think emojis sounds a bit vulgar. It's like saying Legos. It's not Legos. It's not even a Lego. It's a Lego brick. Yeah. There's no such thing as Legos. So there you go. That's revealed me to be a horrible snob.
No, that's a very good. That's a good example. All right, so there are there's origin stories for the emoji, and you get into them in the book. And I think there are probably different places where you can see. I mean, it's very interesting to see how it came about in the not texting, but the message. I can't remember pagers. They're so out of fashion that I couldn't remember the name of them. Pagers had a heart emoji originally by one company in Japan. But then then there are other things like, we had in the early days of computer, we had dingbat fonts, which were basically emoji. So where does emoji get its start? Was it in Japan?
It's all of those places. I think it's almost worth going backwards from what emoji are now, and that kind of, you then see that it kind of it has this inverted family tree. So an emoji at the moment is effectively the same as any other character that you can type on your computer. It's communicated by what's called a code point, which is a number, really, that identifies that particular thing. So A has a number, and S has a number, and face with tears of joy has a number. And all of these numbers are managed by an organization called the Unicode Consortium. This is a bunch of engineers, effectively, and people who work for large companies like Google, Meta, and so on, all of whom pay quite a lot of money to be part of the Unicode Consortium. They meet in California, different places in Silicon Valley, And they are the people who decide which new emoji we get every year. And the reason that they, not the reason, is there a raisin emoji? I'm not sure. The reason that they deal with emoji in the first place is because effectively Google asked them to. And Google wanted to get into Japan. They wanted to start offering their products in more places, and so they wanted to start with Gmail. And one of the engineers in Japan who was working on Gmail said, "We have to have emoji. Japanese people will not like this if it doesn't support emoji." And it turned out that Japan had these things called emoji. A bunch of different mobile phone companies, cell phone companies, had come up with their own lexicons of these little symbols. So there were three big ones. NTT is one that people may know the name of, or Docomo. And so NTT had its own set of emoji, KDDI had its own set, SoftBank had its own set, and they overlapped, but they didn't overlap entirely. So there's kind of a translation layer between all these different phones as you sent messages from one to the other. And sometimes this meant that even an emoji would disappear or be replaced by a symbol that just meant, "I'm sorry, I don't know what this means." And Google wanted to get around this. Google wanted to standardize all of this. And so they did. And if you then go further back, you find that NTT, this first company, was in fact the one to kind of invent the modern networked emoji. As you say, this was the heart that appeared on a particular pager in the mid-90s. So in some senses, that's the first emoji. That's where it comes from. But Japan in general seem to have and continues to have quite a visual culture. And for instance, the 1960 odd Tokyo Olympics were apparently the first to use pictographic wayfinding symbols. Japan, of course, has anime and manga, so animated television programs, movies, comic books drawn in a particular style. And there's a very distinct set of kind of tropes that appear in both of these. And a lot of these made their way into emoji. So I guess there is this, and then of course Japanese writing itself, kanji is not pictographic, but it was once pictographic, and some symbols in kanji now still, even now, look vaguely like the things that they describe or the things that they represent, even if many of them do not. So there is this feeling that Japanese culture has some visual aspect to it, or places some importance on visual appearance that perhaps other cultures don't in the same way, and that's why emoji came out of there. But at the same time, I don't think it's the whole story, because as you say, in the West we had dingbat fonts, and these are the kind of modern equivalent of what were called pi fonts, which were collections of miscellaneous symbols that printers would buy, big boxes of lead sorts that they could use to put in different little decorations or unusual characters when they were setting a page of type. And this has got quite a long history. You know, lots of typographic specimen books will have these are all of the ornaments we do, not just the sober type and the sober letters and numbers, but also all of the interesting decorations you can put around your page, all the special characters. So the concept of having little characters in amongst your text is quite widespread. And in fact, if we go back to Japan again, in the, I think, 18th or 19th century, there was at least one Buddhist sutra which was printed using effectively pictures and numbers, so not using kanji or katakana or hiragana. So the world at large has had a concept of things that live in amongst our text. As far as emoji are concerned, it seems to be that this kind of coalesced into the modern form of emoji in Japan in the kind of 80s and 90s, and then really took form in the 2000s.
Yeah, I wonder, I'm not sure the answer to this, but most of what you described there is probably decorative sort of enhancements, whereas emoji convey sort of often a meaning. Like the tears of joy is telling us something, is communicating an idea.
Yeah, you're right. I guess, yes, I would agree with that. I think, though, that the way that we use typographic ornaments and other symbols like that was not always purely decorative. So if you go back to, let's say, the medieval period, then we are writing and drawing things in the margin to help us understand books. Like, we as readers add meaning to books by drawing like a little hand to say there's something interesting in this line, or an octopus or something, right? Some device in the margin that serves as like a bookmark. So it's a fairly specific example, but I mean, I note that emojis got lots of pointing hands. Pointing hands are useful to indicate there is something in this bit of text which is interesting. You should pay attention to it. So we've been doing that for some time. Another thing is I found one isolated example of a printed emoji in a book from 1930. It was a children's book. It was called Carmen of the Golden Coast. And right at the very end of this book, on the last page, there are a couple of printed emoji, a kind of a sad crying face and a happy smiley face. And they were used very much as you would use emoji. So at some point, some printer thought this was a good idea. And I'm sure that has not been an isolated thought. So although I didn't survey the whole body of printed works to find other instances of, symbols in text with some meaning, I'm sure they exist.
Yeah, they do. Okay, interesting. So is emoji, what is emoji? Is it, I mean, I know there's been, attempts to let's do the story of Moby Dick using only emoji, and it doesn't work, so it's not a language. I don't think it has grammar. It's so, but it's not punctuation, and it does add meaning. What is it? How would you define it?
It's all of those things and none of them at the same time. So emoji are pictures. Like let's be absolutely clear about it. They are pictures of things, and any meaning or semantic sort of importance they carry are there because we've given them that meaning. They're not like letters that evolved from pictures of things into symbols that we can then combine. They're not symbolic. They are still iconic. They still represent the thing that they are a picture of. But I guess let me think. They do seem to demonstrate grammar in some ways. So there's been some work to suggest that, and it's fairly loose. I'm not sure how statistically valid it is, but it seems that different speakers of different languages tend to use emoji that implies a particular word order, like, subject, verb, object, or object, verb, subject. We do seem to actually, in some cases, apply meaning in this way. In fact, there was one study that found that I think it was Mandarin speakers who use the same word order that we do actually reversed it when they used emoji, which was quite interesting. So they used emoji in a kind of 180 degrees to the way they would normally write a sentence. Again, not all the time, but there was enough of a kind of a signal here to suggest that in some ways they are acquiring a grammar. They're not a language, of course, because the meaning of an emoji is not even, there isn't even enough convention surrounding it to say that it's a language. Plus, is it a verb? Is it a noun? What is it? What is it doing? Is it an adjective? That hasn't really developed yet in a lot of cases. Separately, I think you can argue they can be used as punctuation. There's one very clever thing, which is using these as air quotes. I love that. I think it's so clever to use a really, I'm using scare quotes, but I'm going to really ram it home by using the little V, the sort of fingers in a V emoji on either side of the word.
I haven't seen that. Okay.
No, it's tremendous.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite uses of emoji. There's something called a ratchet clap, which is when you really want to emphasize something, you can put an emoji, the clapping emoji between the words. And so that's almost like a new type of punctuation or almost body language. So I think there's a couple of linguists, Lauren Gone and Gretchen McCulloch, who have called it body language for the web. And I think that's a pretty good way of describing it. It's like punctuation, but it's somewhat more than that. And it has more ambiguity and perhaps more flexibility in some cases or in some ways. So I think that's as good a way of describing it as any other.
Okay. Well, Lauren and Gretchen have been on the show, and they did not mention that. Actually, so I had meal with Lauren in Glasgow, I believe. Yeah.
And she didn't bring it up there either.
When I was on the trip, she did not mention it there.
Oh,
but
that's a terrible omission.
But it's a wonderful idea. So So interestingly, at the time of this, there was people were saying we need a punctuation mark for sarcasm at the time of Shady Characters. And I remember there was somebody who came out and actually sold this the sarc mark, this punctuation for sarcasm. And I guess that maybe we just, and you don't hear much about it anymore. Maybe we don't need it because we have emoji that sort of conveys the idea of.
I mean, I think the fact that at the time, so when Shady Characters came out, emoji was still relatively new. It was a few years old. It was really, it was on the upswing, but it hadn't really taken off. And at the time, I think most people complained that irony or sarcasm, it's like if you can't convey it in writing, then a mark is not going to save you. And also, if you have to use a mark, then you're giving the game away, and half the fun is gone. So I think irony and sarcasm marks are not necessary. There are some fantastic examples of irony marks. There's a type foundry in the Netherlands called Underwear, who devised this thing. Oh, what did they call it? The Ironieteken. So the irony mark in Dutch. It's like a little zigzag exclamation mark, and it's such a neat way to express. You can look at it and you think, I almost get what this is saying to me, and I kind of in the same way that emoji conveys meaning, which is an emotional one, as opposed to a very specific, I'm translating the meaning of that symbol in my head. It's a picture of something. It takes the exclamation mark, which is embedded in our consciousness, and breaks it and does something to it to make it look different. And I think the effect it has is just right. I actually I redesigned the Shady Characters website a few years ago, and I contacted the type foundry of the font I was using for the new version and asked them to do some custom marks. And I asked them to do an Ironieteken, and so they did. So they made I think 6 new marks, which I've been able to use on the website to represent things like the irony mark and the capitulum, which is a form of pilcrow. So that was a lovely thing to do.
Yeah.
Typography people are great in general.
Yeah.
They're such nerds and so enthusiastic.
Right.
But I think for emoji sarcasm, another linguist, this is terrible, Jane Sullivan, who worked for Emojipedia for a while, she talked about the upside down face, or the upside down smiling face emoji, and she talked about it as conveying awkward sadness, which is a good way of putting it. But I think it is used as a kind of, not a sarcasm mark as such, but more of an irony mark. Anytime you need to convey that something is off or upside down or wrong, it's like flying the flag upside down.
Yeah.
The upside down smiling face emoji is the one you want to use. There are lots of other options. I think melting face is often used to convey sarcasm, or a kind of a shrug, I've given up, or I can't even. So there are lots of options. Although, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I don't want to interrupt you if you're on a roll.
I'm just sort of thinking about, did emoji kill the sarcasm mark? And I think no. I think the sarcasm mark fundamentally was flawed, or the concept of it was flawed. But emoji are different. They're not very staid symbols. I don't think anyone looks at like an M and has an emotional reaction to the letter M. We might have an emotional reaction to the word that it makes up, but emoji, a picture of a face is a picture of a face, and we respond quite strongly to pictures of humans or pieces of human beings. So an upside down face, I think, probably beams into our brain directly in a way which is somewhat different to the way that words and letters work, which is perhaps, so they haven't replaced sarcasm marks, but perhaps they are effective as them in a way that a punctuation mark couldn't be.
Interesting. And I've always, that's one that's confused me. I have to admit that when I've seen the upside down, I don't know is it supposed to be sadness because the smile's upside down? Is it confusion? I mean, and maybe that's the idea. There's something I'm trying to convey here that, it's like an artist who paints and says, whatever you see in it is what it should be. I don't know.
I tallied up the number of different individual meanings that I came across for that one mark, and I think I got to 17 or something like that. So it can mean whatever you want it to mean, but they all boil down to the meaning that I want to convey is opposite to the thing I've just written.
Okay. So there are plenty of there are plenty of other examples of, I mean, you say you've got this consortium that comes out with emoji every year, and it doesn't always necessarily follow what they think it's going to. I think probably the most famous example is the eggplant aubergine symbol. Is there are there some other examples? I mean, most people probably know that one. Are there other examples of um, symbols that have sort of had a meaning that changed and now something completely different?
Um, hmm. I guess, well, again, the interesting thing is an emoji is a picture and it doesn't have a meaning. It is a picture of a thing. And if we choose to attach meaning to it, then we can. I think I mean, the eggplant or aubergine emoji is a good example. There's a whole pile of others in a similar vein, like the peach, um, which, well, you can imagine what the peach means, I suppose, or look it up. And one interesting thing happened. Apple changed the design of their peach emoji slightly, so it looked a bit less like the anatomy that people imagined that it looked like, and there was a bit of an uproar, and so they quickly changed it back so
Ah,
that it looked the same. But I think maybe the most egregious example I've seen is emoji racism. So there's a big
mm,
football tournament um, called the Euros. So it's the basically sort of the national championship or the team championship for national teams in Europe. Happens every 4 years, I think. It's quite big. And in the final, just after the pandemic, so 2021, because it was delayed from 2020, England were playing Italy, and both very good teams. England was playing at home in London, and the game got to the end, and it was drawn, which meant that they do penalties. So they take shots at goal until one team has scored enough, and then they've declared the winner. Um, Three of England's players missed, and coincidentally, they were all black. And this then led to a bunch of people using things like monkey emoji and banana emoji to react to this what they perceived as being failings of this ethnic minority of the English team, which is just appalling. One guy actually was prosecuted eventually for doing this, which I think is a fitting punishment. Um, but I guess it just goes to show that an emoji can be as innocuous or as controversial as we make it. There are occasionally moral panics about emoji being used as sort of drug slang. So a snowflake means cocaine, snow, or a pill could mean lots of different things. A mushroom could mean magic mushrooms, and in fact, the DEA, I seem to remember, put out an infographic a few years ago, which was meant to help parents identify the drugs their kids were trying to buy or sell online, and it was just so performative. Like it's a code. Words are used as code. That's what slang is, and it felt like blaming words for having meanings. So you can get controversial emoji, but we make them controversial, and we're just as guilty as if we give a word an objectionable meaning. I think.
right, right, and yeah, I mean, you make the good point that it's. I'm sure when the the coding geeks get together in the room and decide what emoji to use, they are trying to take some of this into account, but you can't control what happens once you release it.
No, so they have a certain number of they've got a certain number of criteria when it comes to selecting emoji or when deciding which submissions to admit. Actually, I'm just going to digress for a moment. The whole evolution of emoji is fascinating in terms of modern emoji. So Google goes to Unicode and says we want to standardize this, and Unicode says, okay, cool. And it turns out, but you mentioned Wingdings and other fonts like that. One of the things that Unicode did back in 1991 when they were founded was they looked at all of the different computer character sets in use around the world and they standardized them all. And they threw in a bunch of Pi fonts of sort of a dingbat fonts at the same time, just because. So Zapf dingbats went in there, Wingdings went in there, and so Unicode had a lot of characters that ended up being labeled as emoji even before they were asked to standardize emoji. They had about 120 characters which were in these emoji character sets. So the initial emoji character set was about 722 marks, and a sizable minority was already present in Unicode. And so then Unicode had this initial batch of emoji, and people could start to use them on their phones, and they immediately started to get pushback saying, well, the emoji are all white, or the cops are all men and the dancers are all women. Like, there were so many different blind spots or omissions in emoji that Unicode immediately thought, okay, we need to fix this. And the funny thing was that they could fix it. Every other script that Unicode has digitized is something that existed in the wild, and they don't decide to add new letters to English. But emoji was such a new thing, they felt no compunction in adding new characters to it. And they opened Pandora's box at this point, because this meant that people could start to harass them to add new emoji.
Yeah.
When an op-ed complained about the lack of a taco emoji, for example, then eventually they would, they'd evaluate it on its merits, and they say, yes, okay, we can have a taco emoji. And so they've gradually tightened up the rules. So it's always been the case that, like, no logos or brands, you can't buy an emoji. If the symbol has to live in and amongst text, so traffic signs typically don't make it in there, although some of them have. No gods or other deities. And it doesn't matter how many people sign your petition, that's not enough to get your emoji in there. They're also now not doing flags, interestingly. They've realized no one uses flags apart from national flags. So you can propose any flag you like, but if it's not a flag of a country, it won't go in.
So pride flags, they're not.
There is a
Haven't
pride
seen them
flag
referenced.
because it was in there
Okay.
already before they said no one uses flags. But in general, they're not popular. Emoji are placed into categories, and some categories are wildly popular, others are wildly not. And then within the categories, you tend to find that a few just eclipse all the rest. In fact, another interesting thing is that emoji follow the same frequency distribution as words. So if you look at any large corpus of English, let's say works in English, and you plot the number of times the most common word appears, then the next most common, I think it's like the, and, of, and so on, then you see a curve that kind of does that. It starts very high and then steeply tapers off and is quite flat for a long way. Emoji have exactly the same curve. It looks absolutely identical. And if you do some mathematical trickery on either one, you get pretty much a straight line. There's this thing that we do, that humans do with information, not even with language, information, that means that you tend to get some symbols that are very popular. And then there's usually a fixed ratio between the first and the second, and the second, the third, and the third, and the fourth, and so on. So emoji obey that same distribution. Sorry, that was a bit of a digression. I have no idea why I started.
No, that's really interesting, because then that leads to the question: what are the popular emoji? I assume the smiley face is the most popular.
So it tends to go back and forth between face with tears of joy, which is the emoji with a tear on either side of his face, which is different to which is different to loudly crying face, which is when the tears are streaming down the face. So face with tears of joy is pretty much always the most popular one worldwide. The red heart is usually second. And what you tend to find is that most countries will use one of those two. Pretty much all the time. Those are the top two emoji. There are some different ones. Some countries prefer flags, ironically, usually their own flags, often smaller countries. And for a long time, in fact, France used the red heart. That was the most popular emoji in France, which seems appropriate. France is romantic. Let's go to Paris. But now it's not. It's back to being faced with tears of joy. And I think somewhat ironically, Britain now, the red heart is the most popular emoji. So it flip-flops, it changes. But it's pretty much always one of those two.
And Cindy in chat mentions thumbs up. That's got to be very popular.
I don't have a list of the. Actually, I do have a list of the frequencies, but it's buried in a spreadsheet somewhere, so I will not be looking it up.
Yeah, that's right.
Thumbs up is quite popular, although I think I haven't come across this, but perhaps I'm too old. Apparently, some younger people look down on the thumbs up because it's a very low energy way of agreeing to something or saying yes, thank you, I acknowledge. But of course, it's now used in a lot of places as a reaction. So in Facebook or Instagram or Teams or whatever, you can double click or hold down on a message, and you'll get a little palette of emoji you can use to react to it. And the thumbs up is almost always there. And I use it a lot at work in that context. And I haven't been mocked for it, but then most of the people I work with are just as old and as boring as I am. So perhaps we don't see it as being tedious or unexciting.
Right. Well, it does the job, but that's the main thing, I suppose. So I find it's interesting. I tend not to use tears of joy, and I suppose it's because it's so darn popular that, and I see it all the time, and it's usually exaggerated. Nobody's really crying when they're, when you said something funny. Nobody's crying because of that in laughter. So I usually do a more of an understated smiley face that's not even a big smile, just sort of a little smile. But I think my favorite, if I were to pick a favorite emoji, and I think we should all in the chat, people in the room, share your favorite emoji. We can talk about some of these, maybe the one you use the most, or the one that you just like your go-to for fun, that reflects something about your personality. Mine is the raised eyebrow. The fairly new one, I think, with the, because it's questioning, it's sort of neutral in terms of its thing. And I don't use it that often because I figure it'll upset people if they don't understand what I'm getting at. But yeah, I'm the raised eyebrow, and you are, interestingly, the whale, the spewing whale.
Picking a favorite emoji is like picking a favorite color or a favorite child. You might have something on the tip of your tongue, but you don't really mean it.
Okay.
I like whales. I like Moby Dick. I did try and read Emoji Dick, but it's unreadable. There's an interesting anecdote about the raised eyebrow emoji. So that came out in 2016 or 17, so the president of Unicode at the time was called Mark Davis. I actually interviewed him for the book. He's a really nice guy, and he tweeted about some of the new emoji that were coming up that year. And he mentioned the one with one eyebrow raised, and he said, or as I call it, the Colbert emoji, after the talk show host. And then the talk show host went on to feature it on his program. He did a segment on the Unicode Consortium, this weird, obscure bunch of guys and some women who meet in boardrooms in California to vote on emoji and other things. Unicode, I think, was quite happy about the publicity, the positive publicity, but not all Unicode contributors were happy about it. Some of them were starting to get a bit irritated that emoji was turning into a bit of a sideshow. Whereas the consortium, they felt the consortium existed through the very serious work of encoding new scripts. And it led to a bit of an argument that was called in the press Emoji-geddon, because the feeling was among some people that Unicode really needed to get out of emoji. And they've tried. They have tried a couple of times to sort of abdicate responsibility, to say we don't really want to deal with this anymore, but nothing is quite stuck. So they still have it. The Emoji-geddon furore died down, and we're back to business as usual.
So what is the future of emoji? I mean, it's a limited number every year, but presumably you can have an infinite number of emojis. So where is there a curve, I wonder, that it's been
I bet there is.
going up and up? Or
I suspect it follows. It follows the same curves as language in general. Probably a big spike at the beginning and then a tailing off. I don't know. So I mentioned that Unicode have twice, actually probably more than twice, tried to get out of having to care about emoji. So they have talked about mechanisms that would let people come up with their own emoji, or that would let people exchange concepts rather than emoji, and then it'd be up to their phone or their device to look up some appropriate image for that concept. Neither one of those quite worked for different reasons. So as far as Unicode is concerned, they're just going to keep on doing the same thing. They may eventually get to a point where they say, that's it, we're not going to add any new emoji, but I'm not sure how near or far that is. So I guess a lot of the innovation happens outside of things that are formal emojis. So I mentioned that an emoji in the technical sense is just a character. It's just a character that can be displayed on your computer or a phone. But computers deal really well with images as well. So there was a period in sort of mid 2010s where what were called Moji apps were very popular. So take the E off the front. And these were just applications that allowed you to pick images to send from a kind of keyboard on your phone. So Kim Kardashian had an app called Kimoji, for example, which was a bunch of images of her and her family rendered in the style of emoji. And there was a big glut of these. She made a lot of money out of it. There's a big glut of these emoji apps around about the same time. And that kind of went hand in hand with messaging apps, which increasingly allowed you to add stickers, which, again, little images in and around your chat. So that's always been relatively popular. What is now happening is that companies like Google and Apple are adding mechanisms where you can build your own emoji in inverted commas. So Apple's got a thing called Genmoji, which uses generative AI to build images of emoji that you describe to it. And Google has something called Emoji Kitchen, where you can combine different emoji to get a new one. And these give you stickers effectively that you can use just like any other sticker. I think I heard that Apple are trying to allow you to insert Genmoji in text as if they were real emoji. I don't know how widespread that is. It certainly doesn't travel to non-Apple devices yet. So they want to,
Yeah.
they're trying to blur the boundary of what an emoji is, I guess. So I think at the moment, emoji innovation happens outside of the kind of consortium that actually owns it in the formal sense. But weirdly, I don't know. I had to think about this for the final chapter of the book, and I don't think I care much for these sticker generator things. I think the fact that emoji is this, it's not closed, but it's a relatively small vocabulary. There are a few thousand emoji, which is actually, I think, not far off the number of kanji that there are, or the number of kanji you need to know in order to be able to converse effectively in Japanese, or to write effectively in kanji. And I quite like the idea of this large but kind of learnable body of symbols. And I just have to be creative with them. If I want to say something that doesn't really exist, then I have to figure out how I'm going to say it, how I can combine emoji with words in a creative way. So I like the current system. And I'm not in a hurry to get rid of it, I guess.
I will say I have a Slack group with a number of editors, and we tend to reply or acknowledge each other by an emoji that's fitting to the topic. And somebody once suggested, we should just, whatever you type in when you go looking for something, that's the emojis you should use. But that would be entirely unworkable. But it is amazing how often you want to go for a particular emoji and it doesn't exist. Like, if you want to, you need a taco emoji, you think it should be there, and it turns out it's not. So there is an argument to be made for let's open the floodgates. But I guess I agree with you, though. I don't like. I know that a lot of there are a lot of apps that will throw in all these emoji that sometimes are not artistically to my taste, and often they come with a price tag. You have to buy them, and I'm not a fan of that. Have in that language of a few thousand emoji, have they have some been eliminated, or they once they're in they're stuck?
It's the latter. So I don't think there's any formal way to get rid of any character in Unicode. I think they've deprecated one or two, but given that there are tens of thousands of characters in there, the number that actually have been gotten rid of is vanishingly small. So if an emoji is there, it will likely continue to be there. What could happen? This actually relates to another oddness around emoji, which is although there is kind of each emoji has a name and usually an example of this is what it could like. This is what the taco emoji could look like. It's up to all of the different vendors, so Google, Apple, Facebook, and so on, to decide what the emoji is going to look like on their devices or inside their apps. And they tend to use this to have a bit of personality. For a long time, Android, Google's operating system for phones, had these kind of dancing blobs as emoji. It's very clear when you're looking at an Android emoji as opposed to anyone else's emoji. Apple's always had a very kind of slick, shiny kind of aesthetic for emoji. Twitter was always quite flat and stylized. So they have used emoji to convey a bit of personality or to do a bit of branding, but it sometimes means that they disagree on what emoji should look like. So there's one emoji called crossed flags, and in every context, it is two crossed Japanese flags because it's a symbol that comes from the very original emoji sets. Except Samsung did a couple of crossed Korean flags for literally no reason other than they wanted to. There was nothing to stop them doing it. So any vendor can change the appearance of any emoji that they like. The pistol emoji is another example. It's kind
yeah.
of gone from being a realistic gun to a water pistol on most platforms, except on Twitter, where it went to a water pistol, and since it's become X, has gone back to being a realistic gun, which I think is entirely on brand.
Yeah.
And this is potentially quite serious, right? Of all emoji to have a different appearance, potentially depend. If somebody copies and pastes some text from a non-Twitter app into or from a non-X app into X, then it will change the meaning of that emoji quite substantially.
Right.
So there is this built-in potential, or there are many potential ambiguities, and there have been a few that have changed over time. And I guess the point I was getting to is that this means that ultimately vendors could choose just not to support emoji. So, for example, Apple doesn't show Taiwanese flags on Chinese devices. That emoji might as well not exist for users in mainland China. So there are ways of getting rid of them, but they're never formally gone. And it always depends on kind of the willingness or the complicity, you might even think of it, on the part of the vendors who manage these different emoji sets.
Mhm. So I there's something I forgot to ask about that I wanted to, that and talking about favorite emoji, I think actually I'm going to change my favorite emoji. I think my favorite emoji is the shrug. One of our users in the chat put that in as a favorite. But I always love the original where you use punctuation to create the shrug. And I actually will, rather than do the shrug emoji, I often, I don't remember the combination, but there's a place, I just Google copy shrug emoji and it comes up, you click and you copied it and you paste it. So, but that leads to the other question. Did the smiley face, the winking face, those things, we were doing those without having a pictographic representation of it. So did those come first, or the evolution there?
Oh, yes and no. So there are two distinct kinds of these emoji. Sorry, I'm just looking up when the first emoticons. So the textual ones we tend to call emoticons, and in the West they were invented by a guy called, or the earliest ones were invented by a guy called Scott Fahlman, who was at Carnegie Mellon University. That was 1982. So at that point, Japan likely had proper graphical emoji in some devices. So in the 80s, the rest of the world was getting into home computers. Japan preferred word processors, interestingly. And there are some word processors, I think, going back to the mid 80s, which had emoji sets, like, a good few tens of pictorial characters you could type in amongst your texts. And separately, in Japan, there was a kind of textual emoji as well called a cow emoji. So in the West, we use a colon for eyes, and perhaps a hyphen for a nose, and a closed parenthesis for a smile. In Japan, cow emoji are done kind of left to right. They're not tilted, so they might use parentheses to mean the like cheeks of a face, and perhaps a couple of dashes for eyes or something like that. So there are two different traditions of these textual emoji, or textual emoticons rather. And so again, the idea that we could have something in our text was there. I don't know to what extent they directly influenced real emoji in inverted commas. They were definitely there. They're part of this tradition, but I don't know if they could be said to have had any actual direct influence.
We have. I think I missed a question. We have another question from the room.
This one is inspired by Carol. Carol, do you want to unmute and ask, or would you like me to ask? Okay, perfect. So she got your book hoping to find the name of a character and was surprised to see the vertical bar slash pipe not included. And so the question is, how did you decide what made it in? What were the shady characters shady enough?
Oh, that's an interesting point. I wanted to call the book The Secret Life of Punctuation. And it turns out that most of these marks are actually not punctuation. Relatively few of them are formally punctuation. So the @ symbol is not punctuation. I don't know what you'd call it. It's a typographical mark. The ampersand is not punctuation. It's an abbreviation for the word and. And so it was really it was two things. It was marks that were visually interesting, but also those which had a story. I don't think I had any grander designs than that. Although I did then spend 3 chapters talking about irony marks and sarcasm marks, and lots of them were not visually pleasing at all. But just the concept seemed interesting enough in that case to spend a lot of time with it.
Have you thought about it? I mean, I guess that. Do you feel like this is like you could have done are you working on a sequel with a number of other? Because I mean, really, you've got some that are fairly known. I'd say the Pilcrow is somewhat known. The ampersand certainly. The @ symbol is almost universally known. Are there a bunch of other symbols that you think I should go back and do another part of it?
I think it would be pushing it to write another book, because in a lot of cases I wasn't writing about the mark itself. I was using the mark as an excuse to write about something else. So if I was writing about the asterisk and the obelisk, or the asterisk and the dagger, really what I was writing about was the birth of editing in the Library of Alexandria, and then how those marks went on to be used for footnotes and so on. So that was like the history of editing, and writers and readers kind of competing to decide who gets to assign meaning to a particular piece of text. So that was what I was writing about, in as much as the marks themselves. And I think it might be tricky to do a book in a similar way. I have wondered about doing a kind of like an almanac, maybe 52 characters, and just do a very short bit on each one of them, because there are plenty of characters out there, and just spend a bit more time on visual appearance and usage rather than necessarily the history. Although, to be honest, I don't really know. Having just published that 4th book, we've got an 8-year-old and an almost 3-year-old, and there's not a lot of brain space at the moment to be thinking about book number 5.
Well, that was my question. What is book number 5? But nothing immediately rises to the. Yeah. All right. All right. All right. We're just about out of time, but I have to ask. Some emojis are so odd. What's going on with man in business suit levitating?
That is it comes from the logo for a record label. There was a particular genre of music in the UK called two-tone, which was often, the bands were often made up of both of black and white musicians, hence the name. And they kind of had a uniform almost, which was like a business suit, usually quite tight drainpipe trousers and a little pork pie hat. And the logo of one particular record label was this man in business suit levitating. And it just happened to make its way into, I think, Zap Dingbats or Wingdings. And therefore, as I said, when Unicode just unilaterally inhaled all of these fonts, it just became part of Unicode and was labeled as an emoji, again, almost accidentally years later. So yeah, there you go. It's a symbol for a record label that just almost by accident wound up as an emoji.
Yeah. Is that the only? Are there other examples of symbols of that maybe snuck in there that are thinking about all the emoji thing?
Yeah, let me think about all 3,800 of them. That's the best example of one which has no actual bearing or relation to emoji or the concept of emoji. Lots of others are there for. Honestly, no, I don't know. We could spend all night. We just have to start at the A of emoji and go through them one by one.
Well, some of them do seem like completely out of left field, and Some are very useful, but like you say, now you have I saw on your website, you have a periodic table of emojis. So that kind of can help us guide us to what is maybe useful and not so useful.
Well, that was just partly that was an incredibly cynical attempt to get some eyes on the book,
Yeah.
but also because I wanted to. I did a thing I mentioned earlier. This distribution of word frequencies called Zipf's law, and so about I don't know. I think 8 or 10 years ago, I did a blog post about this for words, and then I did it for punctuation marks. Turns out the punctuation marks follow a similar distribution, and I just had that at the back of my mind, and so I wanted to have a look at emoji and think, how could I? The idea of doing a Zipf's law thing hadn't really occurred to me, but I just wanted to look at them and think, how can you classify emoji? What axes can you arrange them along? To think about what they mean. So I thought about sentiments. There's this concept of what sentiment does an emoji convey? Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it neutral? And so I put together this kind of table which organizes the emoji into different categories and then arranges them from most positive to most negative. So the table is there to help you, I guess, look at some of the most popular emoji in each of those characters and understand how we perceive them. It's not going to change the world, but it was a fun thing to put together.
All right. And the website is still Shady Characters, right? Or do you
Yeah,
have
well,
an
so the
emoji?
main one is shadycharacters.co.uk, and the emoji periodic table is at emoji.shadycharacters.co.uk.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, thank you very much. We've kept people over a little bit, but it's a fun subject, and appreciate everybody coming along, and appreciate you staying up and chatting with us. And I'm glad we finally got you on the show. I'm glad I finally got to. I've followed you on Twitter back when that existed, and now on Blue Sky. So good to meet you in person.
Well, yes.
Thanks very
Thank you for
much.
having me. Thanks.
And next time, August 3rd, August 5th, we are. I'm sorry, I'm stepping on the outro music. Martha Barnett's up next month. Excited about that.